Well, welcome everybody. Normally, I would be hosting here with Ed Gow Jr., but unfortunately today he is out. But that doesn't mean we're not going to have a great time. We've got a new guest on the show. His name is Paul Sullivan. I'm going to do a quick introduction to him in a few minutes. But, the Dad Central show is really honored to be able to bring these conversations to you every week. Looking for bringing tools to help you raise confident and successful kids. And as a reminder, the Dad Central show is sponsored by Dove Men Plus Care, which Dove Men Plus Care reminds you that believes that care is the best of a man, because when men care for themselves and others, there is a positive impact. And so with that, we're going to get right to this. We've got Paul Sullivan. He is the founder of the Company of Dads. This is the first platform dedicated to creating a community for lead dads. Before starting the Company of Dads in 2021, Paul, the Wealth Matters column in the New York Times for 13 years. He's also created the Money Game column in Golf Magazine. So Paul's been a journalist for 25 years, and his articles have appeared in Fortune, Money, Condé Nast Portfolio, the International Herald Tribune, Barron's, the Boston Globe, and Food and Wine. So from 2000 to 2006, he was a reporter, editor, and columnist at the Financial Times. Yes, I'm going to ask you some questions about money. And he got his start as a reporter at Bloomberg and the Institutional Investor. So here's where it really comes in, because he's the author of 2 books. I love this title, Clutch: Why Some People Excel Under Pressure and Others Don't, and Their Thin Green Line, The Money Secrets of the Super Wealthy. So Paul and his wife have 3 daughters. They also have 3 dogs. And when not running the Company of Dads or being a lead dad, he is an obsessive golfer. So Paul, real honor to have you. Welcome to the Dad Central show. Looking forward to this conversation.
Drew, thanks for having me on today. Everything you said is true. So, hey, we're off to a great start. And thanks for getting in the 3 dogs. They sometimes get short shrift, but I'm glad they're included here.
Well, while I don't have any dogs at home right now, I grew up with dogs, and I would probably consider myself a dog lover. So I'm always going to make sure the dogs are in there as well. So, but our show is really rooted in supporting dads with, engaging stories, which I think you're going to have a lot for, but really grounded in what can we take practically away from these stories and apply to their lives. And so, but we really like to start engaging our guests and understanding their story. And so I'm wondering if you could start by taking us back to the early years, Sir Paul. What was life like growing up for you? And if you can comment maybe on how your relationship with your dad, good, bad, or ugly, we'd love to learn a little bit more about that.
Oh boy, the early years. I thought you were just going to go back to
not too early.
Yeah, exactly. It was all warm and comfortable. Then I came out into a cold world and I started crying. Oh, wait, that's too early. That's way too early. No, I grew up in Western Massachusetts. So most people in the world know Boston. I lived about 90 miles west of Boston, a fairly rural part. I always play this for laughs, but I say my parents were bad at being married. It turns out even worse at being divorced. So it was a little bumpy there, and but I had a really great. And I don't want to dismiss my dad, who's an amazing grandfather. He's an amazing grandfather to my 3 daughters. But when they were sort of going back and forth fighting with each other, I was lucky to have a maternal grandfather who I call Papa, and Papa was, he sort of taught me a lot of the things that I still practice as a dad today. And maybe because he's retired, I don't know, but we had a ton of time together and really helped shape my view of being as involved as you can possibly be, and also really helped me compartmentalize in a way. Like, when I'm with my kids today, I'm with my kids. When I'm working, I'm working. Even, you mentioned golf. I mean, when I'm playing golf, for the most part, I'm playing golf. And I try to, and I think it helps me either be better at the things that you need to be better at, or to enjoy the things like golf that you're meant to enjoy. And I really learned that as a kid from a grandfather.
Mm. Well, I think thanks for sharing this story, and very interesting how you described it, that being married, but worse at being divorced. That can be really challenging, right? For everyone involved, but especially for the children where they're growing up. But to have that wonderful influence of as you said, your papa, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's fantastic. What exactly was it that he did that helped you be able to do that to me is a very important skill, to compartmentalize like that.
I mean, if I look back now, and 25 years as a journalist, graduate school training, all this stuff, what he was, besides being my grandfather, what he was a mentor. And we see all the research out there that shows, boys who become, well-developed men, sensitive, caring, hardworking, all the qualities that we want in a man, have a mentor somewhere along the lines. And I think my grandfather, Papa, was my first mentor. But I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to go to a private high school, to go to prep school, and I had plenty of mentors there. When I went to college, I had a couple of significant mentors there. And then when I went to graduate school at the University of Chicago, which is a place not known for being warm and fuzzy, I had a great mentor there in the history professor that I was working with. And it, for the most part, it sort of is carried, through my professional life. There's always been somebody there that, I've looked up to. Like, I'm not, I'm 49 years old. I'm not ashamed to say that a 49-year-old can still look up to somebody else, because there's so much that we can learn from people who've done it before. And I say, like, my oldest daughter is 13. So if you want me to tell you about the movie of life up until age 13, I'm happy to tell you, but I don't know what happens when they're 17. I don't know what happens when they're 21. So, part of the company of dads is looking to create that mentorship community. And we want those, what I call OG lead dads, those guys who are super involved, in the 90s, before, we lived through a pandemic, before we thought differently about life and work and parenting. And I want them to come, they're in the group now, but I want to really take on a lead role to say, hey, yeah, and not dismiss any of the problems, but this is what it's like. I get it. This is what it's like when you got a 13-year-old. But this is, in my experience, how it changes here and here. And so, to come back to my grandfather, it's really what he was, a mentor who happened to be related to me, but he was a mentor in all of those great ways that we think of, mentors, and helping to shape young boys and men.
Yeah, thanks for that. That reminds me of a conversation we had with Jack Armstrong, who's the Raptors broadcaster, and he was a coach, NCAA Division I coach, and then progressed into his career. And it was amazing to hear him, sort of at the top of his game now, talking about that very principle of being mentored all the way along, and still being mentored to this day, as his three adopted boys are, in their early 20s, and he's still asking questions. He's still trying to learn. So what a powerful example of that. And the fact that you got that right at an early age, and it seems to have carried you through all the way to now. And so I'm curious to know a little bit more as we maybe get into the journey of when you actually started to become a father. Maybe can you talk to us about that? Did you have any fears, any hopes, any challenges that came up? And if they did, how did you manage them when they did come up?
Come on, fears of being a dad? What? That's easy. What are you talking about, Drew? Huh? What kind of show are you running here? Of course I remember, going into, so I became a dad in 2009, in August of 2009. And it is such a monumental shift for both the man, but also for the woman. It's a dumb thing to say, but really for the couple as a whole. And I look back and I laugh that we went to the local hospital. We live in Connecticut. We went to the Stanford Hospital, and they had this new parent training. I was like, this is it, man. This is what I do. Like, I prepare for this. I'd already written the book you referenced, Clutch, or I hadn't written it yet. I was working. I was researching it. So I knew it came out in 2010. I knew what made people elite performers, and so much of it was being able to do those things that they'd have to do under pressure, under normal circumstances. I was like, this is awesome. I'm going to learn, diaper changing. I'm going to learn, bottle feeding. I'm going to learn swaddling, all this stuff down. But you do it at 6:00 on a Tuesday after work, and you're all kind of gathered around, and they give you some donuts, and they give you a little bit of coffee, and then you meet some friends, and you're like, hey, you want to go out and grab a drink after? And then when I actually became a father, I was like, what a useless course that was. And these people very well mean, like, you should have the training happen at 3:00 in the morning. A retired Navy SEAL should kick the door into your room, start yelling at you, throw on all the lights, throw water in your face, and then say, go, 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 go. And that is the reality, as every dad out there knows, of what it is like when you have a child, because you have the child in those first couple of weeks, like, oh, they're so cute. And then they start growing, and they're not on your schedule. They don't know what you're doing. And so I wouldn't call it a fear, but it was obviously a challenge that every, first time dad has had. And I guess, the popular term is called it a superpower. But one of the things I do in life, and I've done throughout life, is I adapt. And it's sort of the third principle of people who are great under pressure, is they adapt. But I do it because I believe, I make a ton of mistakes. I'm not but I try to make a mistake just once. And I remember one time our daughter, boy, I don't know, it doesn't matter. Maybe she's 4 or 5, 6 months old. And it was the first time my wife and I went out. We had a babysitter. We went out. We met a friend, and we had some drinks. And I had too many drinks. And I got up, and of course, a child doesn't know this. Now, I didn't have like 14 drinks, but let's say I had 4 drinks, and I should have only had 2 drinks. So I was feeling a little. And our daughter wakes up at 4:30 in the morning, and it's my turn to be on. I was like, oh my god, what am I gonna do? Like, I guess. Oh wait, I can't sleep. I have to get up. And that was that set the tone for my entire time as a father, not the drinking part, the adapting after a mistake part. And that I realized, hey, okay, that was the old Paul. That's awesome, great. But that's not going to cut it now. So I have to find a new version of Paul. I have to find still retain those things that are important to me, going out, socializing, but to adapt them to my present reality, which is, being a father of 1, then a father of 2, then a father of 3. And that means, I'm going out for a drink at 6 o'clock, and I'm having 1 drink, maybe 2 drinks. And then I'm heading home at 8, and I've had that social interaction. But then I'm back to being a dad and a husband. And, I'm going to make another mistake, the following week, but I'm not going to make that same mistake again.
Yeah, so much good stuff in what you shared there. A couple of things I want to pick up on, and then maybe I'll follow up with a question where we can keep going on this. But the fact that you learned from the work that you were doing before about people who are performing at a high level, and you thought, oh, how can I apply this?
Yeah.
Right. And I want to learn. That's where I'm going to go when we start to talk more. I'm going to ask specifically about that learning and how you've been applying that as a dad. But also the fact that you referenced one of those skills, adaptability, but also caught in your mistakes. I think one of the things that many dads struggle with is you're making a mistake and then either repeating the mistake over and over again, and then also beating themselves up about that mistake, which only makes it worse.
Sure.
And so, I don't know, maybe you can talk to us a little bit about that learning from success principles of those who've been highly successful. How do you, as a dad, apply that skill pretty consistently? Or how do you, if you're recognizing that you're not doing something right, how do you then make that shift and move to a better place?
Yeah, I think there's we live in Connecticut. The world's largest hedge fund is called Bridgewater, and it's I don't really know anybody there, but it's kind of it has a shadow effect around people who live where I live, and they practice sort of radical transparency and radical honesty. And when I read about what they're doing, I thought, boy, that is pretty applicable to parenting, because the world's largest hedge fund, and they make mistakes every single day, and then they try to learn from them. And I thought, okay, how am I going to learn from this? And I look at it like, what is parenting? Parenting is an arc. You're never going to be judged by any one moment, even your best moment. And I'll tell you a funny story about that later on if we have time. But it's this arc. And so I've just found in life in general, like, I'm going to try. I go into it with the purest of intentions and the purest of heart, and that I want to do a good job. And then I realize, that's not, working. So I'll give you an example from our second daughter, who is 3 years younger than my oldest. And she was a horrible sleeper, and just didn't find out she had some GERD, but we don't find out this to sort of 6-7 months into. A horrible sleeper. My wife is exhausted. Now we have a 3-year-old and a 0, and we're trying to sort of manage this. And at first I said, oh my God, I just started to complain. What did I complain about? I complained that I wasn't getting enough sleep. And then I complained that, my wife and I were not having enough time together, enough intimate time together. And you look back now and like, what an idiot that I even complained about that, moron. But I did. And then I started thinking, okay, well, this isn't going to get me anywhere. If I learned anything when I was younger, it's like complaining gets you nowhere. And so I said, okay, my wife can't possibly, I happen to be able to fall asleep anywhere. Like, that's another superpower of mine. Literally, I could, if you pause, I could take a nap right now and then wake up, like, anywhere. And so what I started to do with our second daughter, I was like, okay, this is not ideal. I don't love this, but she won't go to sleep unless one of us is walking her around and rocking her, and she has to kind of go to sleep upright. And so I remember writing a chapter of my second book in my head, doing a lap around the island in our kitchen, but not a lap, doing like 40 laps around the island in my kitchen. And then I just took to, just getting in the chair, and the rocking chair in her room, rocking her and literally falling asleep with her. And was this how I wanted to go to sleep? every night? No. But I realized like this isn't going to last forever. I'm not going to be sitting in this chair when she's 2 years old and rocking her to sleep every night. And what did that do? Well, my wife got to rest. Our older daughter got some time with her mom. And I, helped to soothe our, then second daughter, now middle daughter, and get a head start on some sleep. And it worked. It worked. Now, if you want to know, what did I do with that rocking chair? Eventually, I couldn't wait to throw that rocking chair out. If it wasn't toxic, I would have burned it. But it was a way to sort of adapt to a not ideal situation and make the most of it. And so when I think about parenting, I mean, if we go on social media, we only see the glory shots. We only see the moment of triumph. Or if it's a failure, it's a pretty funny failure. But that's not parenting. Parenting is, maybe that's 10% of parenting. Maybe, I won't even say 15. I think that's maybe 10% or less of parenting. So much of parenting is repetitive. And then the other part of it is, sort of rethinking the mistakes you made and adapting. And so in that instance there, both those instances, I just adapted. It wasn't the best circumstance, but it was better than what we had before. And I think that's kind of my life is like, can I make it a little bit better? It may not be perfect, but it's a little bit better. And that example of my second daughter was a little bit better.
Yeah. I really love the fact that what sounds like to me is the thought processes that you had around the whole scenario situation. And I think that's really powerful, right? You focused on solutions rather than problems. You didn't
Right.
bother complaining about something. You said, well, what can we do about it? And so your mind went to the place of, well, what can we think positively towards a solution and a ways to get through this? A brief story of mine. I remember I started with twins. And I remember that same, it was like my partner and I would be two ships passing in the night. I've got one, she's got the other, and we're literally pacing up and down and around the entire house, just getting to fall asleep. Or other nights being in the chair and thinking, I can't do this any longer. And then I would look at the clock and I would say, okay, if I can get to this time, it's going to be okay. And so I was like, okay, I can do that. I just set my mind on that as the goal and the target. And inevitably, literally within like a minute of that time, it's like, the kid will fall asleep, and it's like, and you're like, oh no, is that? And then so you give a couple extra minutes,
oh yeah,
for the time to pass, and you're like, okay, and then you do the old gentle, okay, and you pick him up, put him in the crib, and you're like, kind of walk away, like, success, you made it. Yeah. But that simple, we'll call it a mind hack of like, just get to this time. It's completely arbitrary. There's no, but your mind tells you you can do this. And you can do it, and next thing you know, the kid falls asleep. So anyways, it's really interesting to hear that, because I think the power of our minds and our thoughts around this situation can really make a big difference.
Yeah, but like you said, it's that solution, looking for the solutions. If you sit there and say, boy, this stinks. Well, it does. It obviously does stink. This is not an ideal scenario. Nobody really prepares you for this part of fatherhood early on. And, but if you sit there and wallow in how much it stinks, well, it's not going to make the situation any better. It's in fact going to make the situation, worse. And so how do you move on for that and say, okay, literally it's a cliche, but tomorrow's another day. Like, let's try to just get through today, and then we'll see what tomorrow brings. And at least for me, it's worked out.
Yeah, you're coming to, it's not going to be like this when they're 2 years old. So it's giving you a little dose of perspective at the same time. So, okay. Well, that's great. I mean, I think you've alluded to this, but maybe your age and stage of being a dad now, we got a 13-year-old and, two other daughters. Maybe you can address, like, what's your greatest challenge that you're facing now as a dad?
Well, my greatest challenge is something that I've worked really hard to sort of solve for. And that's, my daughters are at very different stages in their life. They're 5, 10, and 13. And I am an only child. So I didn't, grow up in a house with all kinds of siblings and all this. And my biggest challenge is to spend time, particularly on the weekends when, I don't usually plan much other than family time or something for my kids, or, maybe my wife and I'll go see a movie or something like that. But it's really, how do I get one-on-one time with each of them that is meaningful? And that is so important, because with 3 kids, you know this as a dad yourself, you have these grand visions like, okay, we're all going to get ready. This is the holiday season when we're talking. Let's go to breakfast with Santa. Okay, let's go to everyone. It's going to be amazing. Santa is there, and he's going to have an elf and it's going to get. And what happens is somebody starts arguing. And once they start arguing, it's like they go back and forth. They're like, oh my God, do I really want to see Santa? No, I don't want to see Santa. Do I want to have these watery eggs? No, I don't want to have these watery eggs. I want to have a family moment. And so we still do that, and that's important, but it gives me perspective when I'm doing that, because I know that, with my daughters, I'm just going to go do individual things with them. So my oldest daughter, goes to sleep later than everybody else. And so we'll sit on sort of a couch in our den, sort of away from everybody else. And she and I'll read at night. And some nights we literally just read. And other nights she stops reading and she has questions for me, or we have a conversation, or she tells me a funny story that comes about. My middle daughter, same thing. She plays lacrosse, and so I will make a point to always take her to lacrosse. And in that car ride, we're talking. In the way back, we're talking. She also plays this obscure Connecticut sport called paddle tennis, which is, I don't even know. It's like pickleball meets tennis, but played outside and only in the cold. It seems like something that was invented in Canada, not in the United States. And everybody out there in the cold, and then you drink beer at the end. Except she's 10, so there's no beer. Right. But I'm not very good at it. I don't have any desire to play in the men's league, but I do it with her. And then the 5-year-old, she's so sweet. She got into golf quite early. So people watching the video component of this will see there's a lot of golf stuff behind me in my home office. And if we can't go outside and hit golf balls around our yard, or go to the driving range, she'll come up here, and we just have these moments, one-on-one. And it's something, my wife looks at it a little differently. She likes to have all of them, or do like 2 at a time. It's just something that I personally really enjoy. And so it's making sure I have those check-ins with them, once a week, when it's just the two of us. And then it's just fun, and they're different kids, and you have a different relationship, and you deepen that, and you can kind of sort of appreciate them for who they are, and not serve as the sort of, arbiter or judge or policeman who's doling out, verdicts and punishment as they're fighting with each other.
Yeah. Well, again, I love how you approach it. My greatest challenge, it sounds like, is, navigating the age differences, and also just the uniqueness of each of your children, and then setting aside time to be able to do that. Plus, with this idea of the whole, family, this is what we all do. We go and we have these big events, but it doesn't have so. And the fact that you're intentionally investing time in each of them. But it also sounded like, to me, it reminds me of, John Maxwell is a big mentor of mine. He's got this, concept of basically you move from your world into their world. That's really how you start the process of connecting with somebody else, right? And so you're moving from your world, your ideas, into your daughter's worlds, their interests, the things that matter to them, and you're going there first and connecting there. Powerful stuff. And okay.
When my daughter, like, when they'll say to me, "Hey, Daddy, do you want to do this with me?" I'm like, 100%, 100%. And I'll tell a story. There's I'm sure you have a American Girl doll. It's a sort of type of doll for little girls, and my youngest and the middle one, she was kind of growing out of it, but she really wanted me to play dolls with her, and I'm like, I can do that. And then she really said, it's not fair. You don't have a doll, Daddy. And I'm like, that's fine. And so she talked to my wife, and for Christmas several years ago, I got my own American Girl doll, and it's a boy, an American Girl doll boy, I guess, which sounds kind of ridiculous, but Kevin is what she called him. She named him Kevin after her favorite preschool teacher. And so I'll be there, and I have Kevin, and I get down there, and I play with it. Did I ever imagine growing up that I'd be playing dolls and that I'd have my own doll, Kevin? Absolutely not. But you know what? Am I playing dolls, or am I spending time with my daughters and engaging in their world and seeing, life through their eyes for 30 minutes, 40 minutes? And it's, it's that focused time. There's no phone down there. There's no interruption. And then we go on, and, they get tired of playing dolls, and they get tired of me, and it's great. But it's those, moments that I try to really focus in on.
Yeah. Really great stuff. Thank you, Paul. It's fantastic to hear, and great principles for anyone who's listening. Say, just entering into the world of your children, meeting their needs first. And again, it's not a significant amount. You're saying 30 minutes out of an entire week. Like that's doable probably for most people.
Yep. And what do the kids remember? They remember all those moments, and the accretion of those moments over time. And what's my goal as a father? To have more good moments than bad moments over time. And then that's what we'll stand. Because look, again, back to, like, let's all be honest here. This isn't the Instagram version of fatherhood. We make mistakes. And sometimes we yell when perhaps we shouldn't have yelled, and to acknowledge that. I mean, I'm a great acknowledger of like, I'm sorry about that. That was an overreaction, but it's really to have more of those good moments than tough moments.
Yeah, absolutely. Love that. More of the good moments than the tough moments, for sure. Well, let's maybe shift gears and talk a little bit more about the Company of Dads.
Mm-hmm.
So, you're the creator of it, and why don't you tell us a little bit more about the Company of Dads? And I really love the story, actually. If you can share a little bit more about how you came to create this community.
Sure. So as you said, in the intro, the Company of Dads is the first community created for lead dads. And people are going to say, what in the world is a lead dad? Well, a lead dad is a man who is the go-to parent, whether he works full-time, part-time, or devotes all of his time to his family. And in the United States, there are about 25 million men who qualify as lead dads. That's out of 75 million fathers and 125 million men overall. And we break it down into three groups. 18% of fathers are either divorced, separated, or widowed. So they are lead dads either half the time or all the time. 14% of men in America tick in the US Census, they tick, I'm an at-home dad. So we don't call them stay-at-home dads. We say that you would be a lead dad who devotes all of his time to his family. And then the stat in the US now that's gone through the roof during the pandemic is somewhere around 47 to 48% of heterosexual couples, the wife earns as much or more than the husband. So that is a guy who's our target market because he should, if he isn't already, he should be sharing some of the burden around the house, around all the stuff that are sort of what we call non-gendered roles. A man can't breastfeed, but a man can certainly take his kids to the dentist or the pediatrician or take the trash out and all that. And so that's the foundation of it. But what is a Company of Dads? It's three things. It's a media company, you get podcasts every week, newsletter, et cetera. It's a community to bring together men who are doing this role that is important, but still not considered normal. I mean, most caregiving is done by moms or paid caregivers, nannies, au pairs, babysitters, what have you. And then the third part is working with companies on their employee resource groups, because if there's one thing we learned from COVID and the work from home time, it's that the world has changed and men want to be able to put their hands up and say, I'm a dad, and not be penalized for it, as has historically happened. And if we get this right with men being, fathers at work, we're going to help working moms, and we're going to help reduce the stigma all around at the company that people can be workers and parents, otherwise known as a human. But some companies haven't looked at it that way up until now. How did I start it? Well, when I became a dad in 2009, I was, always super involved, but it wasn't really until 2013 when my wife decided to start her own firm. She had been working, she works in asset management. She worked for a bunch of different firms, and she said, now's the time to do it. And she ended up having to start it more quickly than she thought she would, because the guy who was her partner and, dear friend up until that point, when she said to him, hey, how about we just go our separate ways and you take your clients and I take my clients? He's like, yeah, sounds awesome. And what he actually did was he shut her out of the system, the next day. And so she went into work, and I can laugh now, but I was not laughing at the time. She could go in and literally this guy, not a candidate for your podcast at all, literally cut her off. And she came to me and said, well, what are we going to do? And I said, well, I think you're going to start, I guess you're going to start your firm today. I don't know. I mean, because I was a New York Times columnist, which was wonderful, and it was my dream job and prestigious and fun and interesting. But somebody who works in asset management earns more than somebody who is a New York Times columnist. So not only, we needed her income, we depended on her income. It was higher than mine. And she said, well, what are we going to do with the kids? And I said, well, and at the time we had two. And I said, well, I'll become the lead dad. And she said, well, what does that mean? I said, I don't know, but I mean, it sounds good, doesn't it? Like, I wrote a book called Clutch. You don't want me panicking in this moment, do you? He's like, no, that's good. And we made it work. And so I became the go-to parent, and I was able to do it because I had a super rigid schedule. Everything about my life was known or knowable. Column was due at a certain time. Special sections for the New York Times were due at a certain time. Books take 2 years to write. And when you give a talk or write a book, nobody calls you up on a Monday and says, hey, buddy, can you be in Toronto on Wednesday and give a talk? They're like, no, if I'm going to be in Toronto, I know I'm going to be in Toronto 4 months in advance, and we can plan our entire life around it. And it worked. But fast forward to the pandemic, and the system's been working great. And I was early into working remotely because I realized that part of being a journalist is just making phone calls. I mean, we didn't use Zoom until 2020, but literally just making phone calls. So I can just as well make the phone calls and take notes from my house in Connecticut as I can from the New York Times office. And still, so I did. So a couple days a week, I work from home. A couple days a week, I went into the city, and it worked out fine. But in the pandemic, with everybody at home, super exciting time for me as a journalist. Again, why people hate journalists. You get excited when there's a global pandemic because you're like, I got a lot to write about. It's going to be fascinating. Why people don't like journalists or politicians. I get it. But for my wife, I was like, holy cow, I've built this amazing business, but what is going to happen? She had 4 or 5 employees at the time. Nobody imagines that the economy is going to be supercharged from a pandemic. They're like, no, this is going to be 2008 all over again. This is going to be global despair. What are we going to do? And it was in that moment with, my wife and I now working 100% of the time from home, our kids being here, 2 of them doing remote school, the little one, she's 5, so she was 2.5 then. Remote school doesn't work for pre-K. Like, how do we sort all this out? And it was in that moment I said, God, I feel kind of lonely. There's got to be, some group of other, lead dads out there like me. And when I looked on the Google, because the Google tells you everything, I went to the Google, and turns out, there really wasn't. And then I started thinking, well, if I was a go to work dad, typical go to work dad, gets in the car, gets in the train, goes to work, tons of community for that guy. If I was what, in the States typically called, stay-at-home mom, well, these towns, work, use stay-at-home moms to work. The volunteers in school, they have, clubs if they play a sport, your house of worship, everything is around, stay-at-home moms, and they have community. If you're a working mom, well, every school, every company, even the worst companies, have some sort of group focused on working moms. But if you're the lead dad, you could be working full-time, could be working part-time, could be, devoting all the time to your family. There not only isn't a group for you, but you're the butt of jokes. You're Mr. Mom. You're the house husband. You're retired. And so I thought, And then you look around, and I was like, well, what's a model for this? Well, the model for this was this golf community called the Random Golf Club. And they essentially identified the 85% of people in the United States who love golf, but play it in a different way. They play, 5 holes after work. They, wear shorts and drink beer. And, they're not, this is not the US Open version of golf where they're playing at a pristine course. And they created a community around them. And so once I'd identified from the stats I gave in the beginning, there are about 25 million men in the United States who are lead dads or should be lead dads. I like, how do I craft that community around them? And so that's what we've been doing. I left very amicably. I left the Times in October 2021. They asked me to write a final column talking about my experience, which was, an amazing gift. February of 2022, we launched, made some mistakes here and there, mostly personnel mistakes. But now I brought in a partner to help me on the business side, and he came from the Random Golf Club, so it just randomly worked out the model. He came in, and we've been off to the races with sort of the 3 verticals that I discussed earlier on. So far so good.
Yeah, so much in that, Paul. But when I focus on the challenge of navigating work from home, pandemic, a partner situation, I see the struggle that many dads have, which is how do you balance all of this? And then now you're on a new path. It sounds like the entrepreneurial journey.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure if you've ever saw yourself doing that, but that's what you're doing. And
Yeah.
I can only imagine the demands on your time that pull you away from what you've. The first part of this conversation of being very intentional, focused on building a relationship. Then again, there's the relationship with your wife as well. And so maybe you can talk about how have you been able to keep the relationships solid, or to keep things balanced in the midst of this change that you've over the last 4 or 5 years.
So I'll answer the entrepreneurial part first, because that dawned on me right out of the gate, in that, you have so much energy, you have this focus, you know that it's going to, I've got, there are 5 of us now, working on the company dads. You got to build something, you got to build the infrastructure so it works without me. It can't just be one person, or else it's not sustainable. And the toughest part with that was, any other entrepreneur is like, okay, I'm going dark. I'm going to be working on this. You're not going to see me again for 18 months. But that doesn't work when you're the founder of the company of dads. As I joke, the leadiest lead dad out there, then you look like a hypocrite. You look like a hypocrite. You're like, I can't be a hypocrite. What am I doing here? Who is this guy? And so that, as my wife said, like you're going for the long game. This is something that is, am I catching a moment coming out of COVID? 100%. But this is a long game because this is about, societal change, and this is about corporate change. And all of that happens gradually. It doesn't happen, overnight. When you talk about the other part of it is how have I balanced things, with my wife, and how have I balance things, otherwise sort of in my life. With my wife, we've had to be accepting is what I would say. We don't always have a date night every week, but when we do, we make it something interesting. Like there's this movie that we really want to see, a former New York Times reporter, based on some work she did, and we really can't wait to see it. And so we're intentionally going to see it this Saturday, no matter what happens. We've booked a babysitter. We're talking on Monday, so this is the end of this week, and we're going to go do it. There's not a lot of spontaneous stuff that happens. I mean, that's the reality here. But again, I come back to what's better, doing nothing with your partner or your wife, or scripting it out so weeks in advance that you're going to go see a movie. And I've opted for that. And the other part, when you think about demands on time, I am a super social person. I'm a gregarious person. I love going out and seeing my friends. And I just had to say, if I used to see you 5 or 6 times a summer for a round of golf or something like that, I'm probably just going to see you once, and I'm going to try to make the most out of it, and I'm going to appreciate it. And look, there are jerks everywhere, and so some of the guys I know is like, "Hey man, did you retire?" I was like, what do you? Yeah. New York Times columnists always retire in their 40s because they pay us so well. Like, what are you talking about, moron? But they say, "Hey, you playing a lot of golf?" I was like, actually, no, I played half the rounds of golf, probably less than half the rounds of golf than I did the previous year. And why? Because I'm, super passionate about this new project. Needing to have as much time, with my children and my wife as I did before. And then something has to take a hit. So, and that's, my leisure time. But again, I don't really think of it in those terms because I still feel like I get a lot out of, being with my friends when we play golf or being with my friends when we have a drink. But again, I'm going to go out and have a drink with my friends at 6:00. I'm doing it later this week. I'm going to meet a friend at 5:30, and I know that he has to leave at 6:30, and that's going to be great. And we're going to catch up for an hour. And would I've gotten that much more in 2.5 hours as an hour? I would have gotten a little bit more for sure, but I don't know if I get that much more that would be worth the trade-off in my life right now.
Yeah. Love the takeaway, acceptance, but then also
100%, man.
Yeah. And then fitting in what you can fit in and just enjoying that as you do it.
Yeah. I mean, let me tell you the truth. There's something I had scheduled for later this week, which is kind of interesting, but it's not time sensitive. And the person sent me an email today, a very long email, apologetic, canceling. And I sent back to the person and said, "Don't worry about it." And in my mind, I was like, "Thank God it got canceled. Yes, I just got, 30 minutes of my life back. I'm going to, but whatever. I'm not complaining about anything. I'm not complaining. I'm juggling."
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's an important skill that we can always keep working at. So it sounds like you're down the road very well. Okay, well, let's shift it and talk a little bit more about maybe the dads that you work with. So in your work and the company of dads, what have you found to be the area that lead dads needed the most support, or maybe are getting the most value out of when it comes to the company of dads?
Well, I mean, every dad taking on a primary or go-to parenting role or doing anything that's non-traditional or anything coming out of the pandemic. This isn't unique to the company of dads community. What do they need? They need a place to get mental health support. I mean, that is a huge issue. I mean, it just is. And do moms need mental health support? 100%. That's just not my demographic. I'm focused on fathers, and so that's something that is a consistent. And we're working to bring on a sort of licensed psychologist to really help with that, because I think too many other groups that exist, the advice is coming from within the community. Now, if you have somebody who is struggling giving advice to somebody else who's struggling, I don't think that's optimal. That's in the very least suboptimal, to put it kindly. But what do I say on the positive note? What do I see? man, I just see relief. I see these guys coming together, all different walks of life. And it's like, you are like me. I mean, there are 25 million men out of 125 million men. So, what is that? 18% of men all around in America fit this category. And it's this relief because you can come together and have a discussion. And if you're not going to be made fun of in a malicious way, you're going to be made fun of in a sort of caring, supportive way. I mean, men will always make fun of other men. It's how we are. It's how we communicate. We joke with each other. But I'll tell you the story. Like there was this guy. We did a podcast with him. Won 8 Emmy Awards writing for The Daily Show. So back in the day when Jon Stewart was on The Daily Show, huge, still a huge hit, but huge hit. And he is the lead dad to his 2 children now, still working in comedy, still doing stuff. And his wife worked for a school in Manhattan. And to get to know each other, he came out on some random Tuesday, and he and I were going to play golf. And the night before, we were texting back and forth, and he says, I don't know if I'm going to be able to make it. This has happened with my kids, and I got to coordinate this with my wife for it to work. And I was able to go back to him and say, don't worry about it. Like, I get it. If it happens, it happens. Now, if I think of, Paul Sullivan, if I think of myself before October of 2021, when I was, out there with my friends who were not lead dads and who did not know that I was a lead dad, it was almost like I was I was covering what I was doing. And so for me to have been honest to them and say, you know what, I may not be able to make this because this thing has shifted, my wife's work or my kids. And I may not be able to go, but I'll let you know if you can just keep a spot open for me. If I can make it tomorrow at 10, I will. I never would have said that. I never would have said that. I used to joke that, you'd finish a round of golf and you'd sit around, you'd have a beer, and all the guys checking their email, and I'd be checking my email for work, but there'd be a lot of like kid stuff in there too. And while one guy is over there saying like, "Can you believe my wife did this?" I always wanted to say, and I never had the guts to do this. I always wanted to like blur it out, like, "Oh my God, do you know what it's like to get a 5-year-old into ballet class in this town? I mean, you guys have certainly all done it, right? I mean, it is like you cannot, but it's just ballet. I mean, plie, jeté." They just look at me and they say, like, "Sullivan, would you have like 14 drinks out on the course? What are you doing?" And now one of the best things is bringing together this other group, but also, again, being the leadiest lead dad out there, I can go forth and say, yeah, this is what it is. And I am myself honest with who I am. And I think that honesty is helping to bring, other guys along that, look, I mean, this is a good thing. We are, do you want to be a sociopath? Do you want to be a dad who never sees his kids? I mean, that's the definition of a sociopath. You're just procreating and leaving. You want to be involved. And when you can have this role and, look, we have plenty of, divorced lead dads in our group. We have plenty of, widowed lead dads. We also have a lot of, dads who are in same-sex couples. So it's not always your spouse that you're supporting, but it's all about, being open about what you're doing as a lead dad and working to helping the whole family, whatever your family structure may be, helping that whole family fulfill its potential.
Yeah, great story. And really many things that we could explore, but not going to explore it. But I do want to talk about them. And we've had many conversations with dads about vulnerability, authenticity. And I think you just described that difficulty that emerges in the social structure of men or of dads in particular, right? Where you're not able to actually be real. I know you joked about saying, "Can you believe what it's like to try and get a 5-year-old into ballet?" And this, that's the challenge that you were going through. And
it really is hard. I'm not just playing. Yeah. It is really hard, but nobody.
I would imagine. Yes, absolutely. But we joke about this, but the reality is there needs to be more of what you're creating in terms of an ability to come and be real and be honest about what's going on, and then find commonality with somebody else in that process, and then be able to support each other in that process, or encourage each other, or be able to take it from a real negative taking you down to like, how do we move forward solutions and finding ways to be positive. So I think it's really powerful and something that's very much needed.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
That's great. Well, why don't we wrap up with just maybe 2 quick questions?
Okay.
Advice questions from you. Okay, since you're the lead dad, we're looking to you as the OG right now.
Oh boy.
Okay, so
Is that a bald joke? Is that because I'm bald, isn't it? Man, Drew, we're having such a good conversation.
no, not even, because normally my hair would be even shorter like I'm bald. My co-host has a beautiful bald head just like you.
Okay, all right,
So
good.
I'm definitely not on the bald. So the first one would be you're an author of a book about wealth secrets. Dads often struggle or really focus on the provision, and we know from our research, certainly in Canada, that that's one of the stressors for dads is providing financially. So what advice would you have for a dad when it comes to just one money secret, or one, like, if you want to do one key thing with your finances as a dad, what's that?
Think about money as, something around which you can make choices. I mean, that's the whole thesis of the Thin Green Line is, the more money you have, the more choices you have. The less money you have, perhaps fewer choices. But no matter how wealthy you are, you can't do everything you want. And so choices really factor into that book, because so many personal finance books are more like diets, like don't do this, do that. And as we know, diets always fail. And I framed it more in the situation around choices. And this factors into what I'm doing with the company dads. What any dad can do is, what are you doing in your life as a father? Well, you're making choices. You just can't. You don't have the unlimited time that you did when you were 20 and single. You just don't, but you're making choices, and in being very conscious about that, either with your money or with fatherhood, making those choices can give you greater satisfaction in life.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. And one more, just a general. If a dad wants to be a better dad, like, what's your advice for dads?
Put down your cell phone. Sit with your kid on the floor, or however old your son or daughter is, and just be there and just see what happens. And it's not a competition. It's about getting in there and having focused time and unstructured time. It doesn't have to be, okay, what are we going to do? Let's go to a movie, let's go to the park, let's go out to dinner, whatever, go grab lunch. That's awesome, that's great. But sometimes, just like, if you can get in bed, while your kids are reading at night, and read with them, if you can be the one to volunteer to drive them and their friends around, if you can be the one who can, once a month, a couple times a month, work your schedule so that you can pick them up at school as a surprise and drive them home. I'm not saying every time it's going to be gold, but the more they get used to you just being there and being, open to listening, the more they're going to tell you, and the deeper your relationship will be. Now, the flip side of this is, please don't be prescriptive. Don't cut them off. Don't hear something and say, I wouldn't do that. No. I mean, the rule number one as a journalist, for which I was for 25 years, is to ask people questions and then shut up. Let them answer and listen to what they have to say. So it's that being present, waiting for that sort of golden moment, and then just listening. And you get so much out of, open-ended questions. What's an open-ended question? Well, what isn't is, I wouldn't do that. Would you? Why'd you do that? And I was like, that's kind of interesting. Well, how did that make you feel? Or, wow, why do you think she did that? Those open-ended questions keep the conversation going. And next thing you know, I guarantee this, 100% guarantee this, you have a deeper relationship with your children.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great words of wisdom, I'd say, both the money question and for that there, especially around the building the relationship and, asking questions and listening. I'm a big proponent of that. Something that, part of the coach in me, big part of that as well, like asking questions.
Yeah.
And as you said, just shutting up and listening,
Just shut
allowing
up.
them to share, and then digging deeper into that point. And what comes from that, it can often be very surprising, but very enlightening. And then you can say, well, what can I do with that now that I've done it? So, Paul, it's been a great conversation. Thanks so much for your insight, your wisdom, your sharing, but also talking about some, I think, significant value that the company of dads is bringing to a population who really needs it. So thanks so much for being here.
And Drew, thank you for having me on today. I've really enjoyed our conversation.
All right, my pleasure. And so, as we wrap up the show, I just want to remind you that the Dad Central Show is here to support fathers, raising kids, confident kids, and helping them be as successful as possible. And so, reminder, we love to hear feedback. So please send us your comments to podcast@dadcentral.ca. give us guest suggestions or anything that would be valuable for you, as we want to continue to provide things that are going to help you in your fatherhood journey. A reminder, you can also listen to the show at dadcentral.ca/podcast. And of course, we have a variety of free resources for you at our website, which is dadcentral.ca. And so thanks so much for joining us. We look forward to talking to you in our next show.